Detective Marcus Sullivan stared at the dusty cardboard box labeled Brennan, C. 1988, with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The fluorescent lights of the Columbus Police Department's evidence storage room cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he pulled on a pair of latex gloves. "You sure you want to go down this rabbit hole again, Sully?" Lieutenant Diane Powell leaned against the metal shelving unit, arms crossed. "That case broke you once already." Marcus didn't look up as he carefully lifted the box from its shelf. "It's been 35 years, Di. I promised her parents I wouldn't forget. Her parents are both dead now," Powell reminded him gently. "Then I'll keep the promise to their graves." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. It had been his first homicide as lead detective. Claire Brennan, 24, found strangled and sexually assaulted in her modest apartment on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The images had haunted him for decades. Her body positioned on the bed, the bruising around her neck, the singular cigarette butt found in an otherwise immaculate apartment belonging to a non-smoker. They had pursued every lead, interviewed dozens of witnesses, collected what physical evidence they could. But in 1988, DNA testing was in its infancy. The cigarette butt had yielded insufficient material for the crude testing available. And eventually, the case had gone cold. Now retired but working as a consultant on cold cases, Marcus had been given permission to revisit the Brennan murder after a new forensic genealogist joined the department. Dr. Eliza Chen had made a name for herself solving decades-old cases using modern DNA techniques and public genealogy databases. If anyone could breathe new life into the Brennan case, it was her. Marcus placed the box on a nearby examination table and opened it reverently. The familiar manila folders, evidence bags, and interview transcripts lay exactly as he'd left them years ago. He reached for the case file, the paper yellowed with age. "Tell me about Claire," Eliza said, entering the room with her laptop tucked under her arm. "Not what's in the file. Tell me who she was." "Tell me." Marcus paused, his fingers brushing against the faded photograph clipped to the front of the file. Claire Brennan smiled back at him, dark auburn hair falling past her shoulders, bright green eyes crinkled at the corners, a spattering of freckles across her nose. She was smart, dedicated, taught electronics at the technical college despite being barely older than her students, worked part-time at a bookstore on weekends to pay off her student loans faster. Marcus's voice softened with memory. Her students loved her, said she could explain complex concepts like she was telling a story. Parents described her as the kind of daughter who called home twice a week just to chat. No enemies, no dangerous habits, no reason anyone should want to hurt her. Eliza nodded, setting up her laptop. "Sometimes that makes it harder. Random violence." "We never believed it was random," Marcus countered, pulling out the original crime scene photos. "Too controlled. Too specific. The apartment wasn't ransacked. Nothing of value was taken. The perpetrator knew what he was doing." Outside, rain began to patter against the high windows of the basement evidence room. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a spring storm rolling in across the Ohio plains. Marcus spread the photos across the table, muscle memory positioning them in chronological order as he'd done countless times before. "April 12th, 1988, he narrated. "Claire didn't show up for her morning class. Didn't call in sick, which wasn't like her. By evening, her colleague Sarah Wilkins was concerned enough to drive to her apartment. No answer at the door. Next day, still no Claire. After a second missed day of classes, the department head called police for a welfare check. Marcus's finger tapped a photo showing the exterior of a modest two-story apartment building. This is where she lived. Officer Ramirez responded to the welfare check. Door was locked. No signs of forced entry. The building manager let him in. The next photo showed the living room. Neat, organized, a half-empty cup of tea on the coffee table, books stacked on end tables. Everything looked normal at first, Marcus continued, until he reached the bedroom. The bedroom photos were clinical, yet somehow still obscene in their violation. Claire's body lay on the bed, positioned as if sleeping on her back, except for the unnatural angle of her head, the bruising around her neck, and the obvious signs of assault. Me put time of death between 72 and 96 hours before discovery. Based on her routine and witness statements, we believe she was killed Friday night, April 8th, after returning home from her shift at the bookstore. Marcus pointed to another photo. This was the anomaly, a cigarette butt on the nightstand. Claire didn't smoke, confirmed by her family, friends, and the complete absence of any smoking paraphernalia in the apartment. No ashtray, no lighter, no matches. Eliza leaned closer. Was it analyzed? As best we could in '88. Male saliva, blood type O. We preserved what we could, but DNA testing back then required samples the size of a quarter. We barely had enough for the blood typing. He reached deeper into the box and pulled out a small evidence bag containing the preserved cigarette butt. It's been properly stored all these years. Think you can get something usable? Eliza carefully took the bag, examining the decades-old evidence. Absolutely. Modern testing needs only trace amounts. If there's DNA here, and there should be plenty in saliva, we can sequence it. She looked up at Marcus, her expression professional but optimistic. This is exactly the kind of case genealogical DNA analysis was made for. Marcus nodded, turning back to the box. There's more. Fibers, hair samples, fingerprints that didn't match anyone in the system. I'll need it all, Eliza said, already making notes on her laptop. And I'll need to understand the original investigation. Who you interviewed, who was cleared, who remained suspicious. Marcus pulled up a chair, settling in for a long session. Let's start with her colleagues and students. We interviewed everyone, but nothing substantial emerged. As they worked through the aging documents, reconstructing the investigation step by step, the spring storm intensified outside. Lightning flashed through the narrow windows, momentarily illuminating the drab room with stark brilliance. Thunder followed, closer now, a fitting backdrop to the somber task of resurrecting a 35-year-old murder. 3 weeks later, Marcus paced the length of the conference room, his patience wearing thin. It's been 3 weeks, Eliza. Tell me you have something. Eliza looked up from her computer, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own exhaustion. Science takes time, detective, even with modern techniques. I don't have time. I'm 68 years old. I'd like to see this solved before I die. She softened. I understand, and yes, I have something. She tapped a few keys, turning her screen toward him. The DNA from the cigarette butt was degraded, but I was able to get a partial profile. Not enough for a direct match in CODIS, but enough for genetic genealogy. Marcus leaned forward, interest piqued. Like those ancestry websites? Similar principle, but more specialized. I uploaded the DNA profile to GDmatch. It's a database genealogists use. The system looks for people who share DNA segments with our unknown subject, essentially distant relatives. From there, I build family trees backward and then forward to identify potential suspects. And I found multiple fourth and fifth cousin matches. Been working backward to find their common ancestors, then forward to identify male descendants who would have been in Ohio in 1988, aged between, say, 18 and 45 at the time of the murder. Marcus whistled. That's a needle in a haystack. It would be, except our cigarette gives us more. Eliza pulled up another screen showing chemical analysis results. This was a Marlboro Red. Common, yes, but it also tells us our killer was likely a habitual smoker. The way the cigarette was crushed out suggests right-handedness. And there's something else. She pointed to a section of the report. Trace amounts of metal particulates in the tobacco near the filter, consistent with someone who works with their hands, possibly in manufacturing or mechanical work. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a flicker of genuine hope. That narrows it considerably. Claire taught at a technical college, lots of people in trades there. Exactly where I've been focusing. Cross-referencing my family trees with enrollment records, faculty, maintenance staff, even delivery personnel who regularly visited the school. Eliza pulled up a spreadsheet. I've identified 17 potential males who fit our parameters and likely share the genetic markers we're looking for. Marcus scanned the list, his detective's instinct humming. We need to narrow it further before approaching anyone. Modern DNA testing is less intrusive. Could we get samples without them knowing? Discarded DNA, Eliza nodded. Coffee cups, cigarette butts, anything with saliva or skin cells. Legally collectible once abandoned in public. Let's focus on current locations first. Who on this list still lives within a reasonable distance? Eliza filtered the spreadsheet. 12 of the 17 are still in Ohio or neighboring states. 3 are deceased. 2 moved to the West Coast. 12 suspects, Marcus murmured. 12 possible killers who've been walking free for 35 years while Claire's parents died waiting for justice. He straightened. Decision made. I'll handle the surveillance and collection. You focus on processing any samples I bring in. Eliza hesitated. Marcus, this is still preliminary. These people are distant genetic relatives who fit certain parameters, not confirmed suspects. We need to be careful. I've been careful for 35 years, he replied, jaw set. Now we're going to be thorough. The first 7 potential suspects yielded nothing. Either their whereabouts couldn't be verified, or the discarded DNA Marcus collected failed to match the cigarette butt's partial profile. By the 8th name on the list, his optimism was fading. Walter Kempton, 65, resided in a small bungalow on the outskirts of Cincinnati. According to Eliza's research, he had attended the technical college where Claire taught during the 1987-1988 academic year, taking night classes in electrical wiring while working days at a local manufacturing plant. He had no criminal record beyond a DUI in the early 90s, was divorced twice, and currently lived alone. Marcus parked his nondescript sedan across from Kempton's house, settling in for another long surveillance shift. The neighborhood was quiet, modest homes with small, well-kept yards. Kempton's house stood out for its drawn curtains and overgrown lawn, not abandoned but neglected. At 10:43 a.m., the front door opened. Marcus straightened, raising his camera with telephoto lens. A stocky man with thinning gray hair stepped onto the porch, paused to light a cigarette, then walked toward an aging pickup truck in the driveway. "Marlboro Reds," Marcus murmured to himself, recognizing the distinctive packaging as Kempton tucked the pack into his shirt pocket. He snapped several photos, then started his engine, prepared to follow at a discreet distance. Kempton drove to a hardware store, then a grocery. Marcus trailed him, waiting for an opportunity. It came in the supermarket parking lot. Kempton finished his cigarette before entering the store, dropping the butt on the asphalt and crushing it under his boot. Marcus waited until Kempton was inside, then approached the discarded cigarette, evidence bag ready. As he bent to retrieve it, something strange caught his attention. Another cigarette butt just a few inches away, and another, partially hidden under Kempton's truck. Puzzled, Marcus collected all 3, labeling them carefully. Why would the man discard multiple cigarettes in the same spot? It was almost as if he came out to smoke more than once, Marcus realized aloud. But why leave the car to smoke? Modern vehicles had ashtrays, unless Kempton was peculiarly fastidious about smoking in his truck. A chill ran down his spine as a possible explanation formed. What if Kempton had developed the habit of never leaving cigarette butts behind? What if, all these years later, the lesson of Claire Brennan's murder had impressed upon him the danger of leaving DNA evidence? What if the only reason he discarded these butts was that he believed himself safe after so many decades? Marcus returned to his car, hope and dread mingling in equal measure. If his intuition was correct, the lab results couldn't come fast enough. The fluorescent lights of the forensic lab buzzed overhead as Eliza carefully extracted DNA from the cigarette butts Marcus had collected. Her movements were precise, methodical, each step following strict protocols to ensure the evidence would stand up in court if necessary. Marcus watched through the observation window, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "You're hovering," Eliza called out without looking up from her microscope. "Just making sure the chain of custody remains intact," he replied, not moving from his spot. Eliza smiled faintly. "The chain of custody was intact when you dropped these off yesterday, and again when I logged them this morning. Nothing's changed in the 3 hours you've been standing there except the growing imprint of your forehead on my window." Marcus reluctantly stepped back, checking his watch for the dozenth time. "How much longer?" "DNA extraction takes time. PCR amplification takes time. Sequencing takes time." She finally looked up, her expression softening at his obvious anxiety. "Go get some coffee. Take a walk. I promise to call the second I have preliminary results." Grudgingly, Marcus left the lab, wandering to the department's break room. He poured a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1988, the year Claire was murdered. The bitter liquid matched his mood as he stared out the window at the Columbus skyline. "Thought you might be hiding in here," Lieutenant Powell said, entering the room with a paper bag. "Brought you a real lunch. That vending machine garbage will kill you faster than retirement boredom." Marcus accepted the bag with a grunt of thanks, opening it to find a sandwich from the deli across the street. "Any progress on the Brennan case?" Powell asked, helping herself to coffee despite having witnessed Marcus's grimace. "Maybe. Eliza's running comparisons now." Marcus took a bite of the sandwich, realizing suddenly how hungry he was. "Got a potential suspect, Walter Kempton. Fits the profile, was at the technical college during the right time frame, smokes the right brand of cigarettes." "That's more progress than we've had in 30 years, Powell observed. "Don't get your hopes up too high, though. Circumstantial at best." "DNA isn't circumstantial," Marcus countered. "If it matches, we've got him." "If it matches," Powell emphasized. And if the evidence from 1988 isn't too degraded for a conclusive comparison, and if there wasn't cross-contamination back when evidence handling was less rigorous, and if Marcus's phone rang, cutting her off mid-sentence. He fumbled it from his pocket, nearly dropping it in his haste. "Sullivan, it's Eliza. You need to come back to the lab. Now." The urgency in her voice had him on his feet immediately. "Sandwich forgotten." "On my way." Powell raised an eyebrow. "Results?" "Don't know yet." But his pulse was racing as he strode toward the elevator. Good or bad, Eliza wouldn't have called him back unless she had something significant. He found her staring at her computer screen, data and graphs filling the display. "Tell me," he said without preamble. Eliza turned to him, her expression careful, controlled. "I ran the DNA from all 3 cigarette butts against our partial profile from the 1988 evidence. And 2 of them were too degraded from sitting on hot asphalt. But the third," she pointed to a section of data on the screen. "It's a match, Marcus. 13 markers in common with our partial profile from the scene. The statistical probability of this being coincidental is less than 1 in several billion." Marcus felt his knees weaken. He gripped the edge of the lab table to steady himself. "You're saying Walter Kempton killed Claire Brennan?" "I'm saying Walter Kempton's DNA matches the DNA from the cigarette butt found at Claire Brennan's murder scene in 1988. Eliza's precision was necessary, the distinction important for court. We need more to prove he committed the murder, but this puts him at the scene." Marcus's mind raced through the implications. "We need to bring him in for questioning." "Carefully," Eliza cautioned. "If he's paranoid enough to avoid leaving DNA evidence for 35 years, confronting him directly could cause him to run or worse. I need to talk to Powell. Get a surveillance team assembled." Marcus was already moving toward the door. "Keep working. See if you can strengthen the DNA profile from the original evidence. I want this case to be bulletproof." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. A surveillance team was established to monitor Walter Kempton's movements. Search warrants were prepared but held in reserve. Background investigations dug deeper into Kempton's life, particularly his whereabouts and activities in 1988. Marcus sat in the mobile surveillance van parked a block from Kempton's house, reviewing the preliminary findings. Kempton was 30 years old in 1988, Detective Rodriguez reported, sliding a folder across the small table. Worked at Midwest Manufacturing making industrial electrical components. Enrolled in night classes at Columbus Technical College from September 1987 through May 1988. Claire's department, Electronics and Electrical Systems. According to the course catalog we found in archives, she would have taught the foundational electricity course that all students in that track took. Marcus nodded, pieces falling into place. So they definitely had contact. She was his teacher. For at least 1 semester, yes. Rodriguez flipped to another page in the file. His work records show he called in sick the Monday after Claire was killed, April 11, 1988. Returned to work Tuesday, completed the semester, then dropped out before the fall term. What about his personal life? Married in 1985 to Deborah Connor. They separated in early 1988. She filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences in March, just weeks before Claire's murder. Divorce finalized later that year. Rodriguez hesitated. There's one more thing. The ex-wife filed for a restraining order in May 1988, claiming Kempton had become unpredictably volatile, and she feared for her safety. The order was granted but expired after a year. Marcus tapped his fingers on the table, contemplating. A man going through a divorce, possibly unstable, fixated on a young female teacher who represented everything positive and successful. It fits, but we need more than circumstantial connections. The radio crackled. "Subject is on the move," a voice reported. Exiting residence, getting into his vehicle, Marcus grabbed the binoculars, peering through the van's tinted window. Kempton emerged from his house carrying a small duffel bag, glancing furtively up and down the street before hurrying to his truck. "That doesn't look like a man going grocery shopping," Rodriguez observed. "No, it doesn't." Marcus's instincts screamed danger. "He's running. Somehow he knows we're on to him." "Impossible, we've been careful." "Tell that to him." Marcus grabbed the radio. "All units. Subject appears to be fleeing. Maintain surveillance but do not, repeat, do not, engage until we have sufficient units in position." He turned to Rodriguez. "Call Powell. We need the arrest warrant expedited. Now." As Rodriguez made the call, the surveillance team reported Kempton turning onto the highway heading east, away from Cincinnati and toward the state line. "He's definitely running," Marcus muttered. "Where's that warrant?" "Powell's pushing it through," Rodriguez reported, covering the phone receiver. "Judge Hernandez is reviewing it now. 10 minutes, maybe less. We might not have 10 minutes if he hits the interstate." Marcus made a quick decision. "I'm going to follow personally. Have units position themselves at strategic points ahead of him, but maintain distance. If he makes a break for it before we get the warrant, we need to be ready." Marcus transferred to an unmarked police cruiser, falling into position several cars behind Kempton's truck. The afternoon traffic was moderate, providing enough cover to maintain surveillance without being spotted. Through his earpiece, he heard updates from the team. Subject continuing east on Route 32, speed steady at 63 miles per hour, approaching junction with Interstate 275. If Kempton took I-275 northbound, he might be heading for another city. If he went south, he could be making for Kentucky. Either way, once he hit the interstate, the chances of losing him increased dramatically. "Where's that damn warrant?" Marcus demanded into his radio. "Just came through," Rodriguez's voice crackled back. "Judge signed off, we're good to go. All units, we have authorization for arrest," Marcus commanded. "Move into position but wait for my signal. Do not spook him." He watched as Kempton's truck approached the interstate junction, signal light blinking for the southbound ramp, toward Kentucky, toward escape. "He's making for the state line," Marcus reported. "All units, prepare to intercept at the next exit. I want roadblocks in place before he reaches the river." Marcus accelerated, closing the gap between his vehicle and Kempton's truck as they merged onto I-275. He was 3 cars back now, close enough to see Kempton's head constantly checking his mirrors. The man was definitely spooked. "Cincinnati PD has units moving into position at exit 77, dispatch reported. "They can establish a roadblock before he reaches the bridge." "Copy that," Marcus acknowledged. "All units maintain current positions. Let him proceed to the roadblock." He settled in, keeping Kempton's truck in sight while maintaining enough distance not to arouse suspicion. 5 miles from the exit, Kempton suddenly swerved, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic toward an off-ramp they were passing. Horns blared as drivers braked hard to avoid him. "Subject exiting unexpectedly at Harrison Avenue," Marcus barked into his radio, following the erratic maneuver as safely as he could. "All units converge on this location." Kempton's truck fishtailed as it took the ramp too fast, nearly hitting the guardrail before straightening out at the bottom. He blew through the stop sign, turning right onto Harrison Avenue and accelerating rapidly. Marcus followed, lights and siren now activated. Subject fleeing at high speed on Harrison Avenue heading west. Request immediate backup. The suburban street wasn't designed for a high-speed chase. Cars pulled to the side as Kempton's truck barreled past, weaving dangerously through traffic. Marcus kept pace, his years of experience helping him anticipate Kempton's moves. "Roadblock being established at Harrison and Westwood Northern Boulevard," came the update from dispatch. "ETA 2 minutes. He'll hit it in less than 1, Marcus replied grimly, watching as Kempton showed no signs of slowing down. Ahead, blue and red lights flashed as police cruisers moved into position, blocking the intersection. Kempton's brake lights flared momentarily before he swerved violently, mounting the sidewalk to bypass the blockade. "He's circumventing the roadblock," Marcus shouted. "Cut him off on Montana Avenue." But as Kempton's truck bounced back onto the road past the intersection, a delivery van pulled out from a side street. The timing couldn't have been worse. Kempton swerved to avoid it, lost control, and his truck slammed into a utility pole with a sickening crunch of metal. Marcus skidded to a halt behind the wreckage, drawing his weapon as he exited his vehicle. "Police, don't move!" he shouted, approaching cautiously as other units converged on the scene. Through the shattered windshield, he could see Kempton slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. The man was conscious, dazed, his eyes unfocused as they struggled to find Marcus. "Walter Kempton," Marcus announced, keeping his weapon trained on the suspect as other officers moved to secure the scene. "You're under arrest for the murder of Claire Brennan." Kempton's eyes widened at the name, a flash of recognition, and something else. Fear? Guilt? Marcus couldn't be sure. "I don't know what you're talking about," Kempton slurred, his words thick either from the impact or from panic. "Save it for interrogation," Marcus replied, stepping back as paramedics arrived to assess Kempton's injuries. "You've been running for 35 years. The race is over." The interrogation room at Cincinnati Police Department's Central Precinct was deliberately stark. Beige walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, 3 uncomfortable chairs. Walter Kempton sat hunched in one, a bandage covering the cut on his forehead, his hands cuffed in front of him. Marcus observed him through the one-way glass, taking in every detail. Kempton's eyes darted nervously around the room, never resting in one place for long. His right leg bounced incessantly under the table. Every few minutes his fingers would twitch toward his shirt pocket, reaching for cigarettes that had been confiscated upon his arrest. Classic signs of nicotine withdrawal compounding his anxiety, Powell observed, standing beside Marcus. Good. Let him stew a bit longer. Medical cleared him? Marcus asked. Minor concussion, nothing serious. Doctor says he's fit for questioning. Marcus nodded, organizing his thoughts, planning his approach. I want to go in alone first. Let him focus on me. It's your case, Powell agreed. Just remember, we need a confession to make this stick completely. The DNA puts him at the scene, but a good defense attorney could still create reasonable doubt without more. I know. Marcus gathered the case file, including the new DNA evidence. I've been waiting 35 years for this conversation. Trust me, I won't rush it. Kempton looked up sharply as Marcus entered the room, his expression a mixture of defiance and fear. Mr. Kempton, Marcus began, sitting across from him. I'm Detective Marcus Sullivan, Columbus Police Department. Do you know why you're here? You people said something about a murder, Kempton replied sullenly. But I haven't killed anybody. This is harassment. Marcus laid a photograph on the table, Claire Brennan's school ID picture, her smile radiant, unaware of the brutally short future ahead of her. Do you recognize this woman? Kempton barely glanced at the photo. No. Should I? Her name was Claire Brennan. She was an instructor at Columbus Technical College in 1988. Marcus kept his voice neutral, watching Kempton's reactions closely. You took her Introduction to Electrical Systems class that year. A flicker of something, recognition, panic, crossed Kempton's face before he controlled it. I took a lot of classes, don't remember all the teachers. Claire was memorable, Marcus pushed. Young, brilliant, popular with students. Everyone remembered Claire. Kempton shrugged, affecting indifference. Maybe I had her, maybe I didn't. It was a long time ago. April 8th, 1988, Marcus said, watching Kempton's eyes. Friday night. Where were you? How the hell should I know? That was 35 years ago. You were in Columbus, Marcus stated flatly. You were in Claire Brennan's apartment. You smoked a cigarette while you were there, and then you strangled her to death. Kempton's face paled, but he maintained his denial. That's crazy. We have your DNA, Walter. Marcus laid another document on the table, the lab report comparing the discarded cigarette butt's DNA to the evidence from 1988. Modern science is amazing, isn't it? A match that's conclusive to 1 in several billion. The cigarette butt you left at the crime scene matches the ones you discarded in that parking lot yesterday. That doesn't prove anything, Kempton stammered, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. You knew, didn't you? Marcus pressed. All these years, you knew that cigarette could be your downfall. That's why you're so careful with them now. Never leaving them in ashtrays collecting your butts, it became a compulsion, didn't it? A habit born of fear. Kempton's eyes darted to the door, seeking escape, finding none. Your wife left you in March 1988, Marcus continued. You were angry, unstable. Claire represented everything you couldn't have. Youth, intelligence, success, beauty. You fixated on her. You don't know anything about me, Kempton snarled, his first real display of emotion. I know you called in sick the Monday after Claire was murdered. I know you dropped out of school after that semester. I know your ex-wife filed a restraining order against you, fearing for her safety. Marcus leaned forward. What happened that night, Walter? Did you go to Claire's apartment to talk? To confess feelings she didn't reciprocate? Did she reject you? Stop it, Kempton whispered, his leg bouncing more frantically now. When she turned you down, did you snap? Was it an impulse? Or did you go there planning to hurt her all along? I said stop. Kempton slammed his cuffed hands on the table, the sound echoing in the small room. Marcus didn't flinch. It's over, Walter. The evidence places you at the scene. Your flight from us demonstrates consciousness of guilt. The prosecutor will make a compelling case even without a confession. He paused, letting the words sink in. But a confession might mean the difference between life with the possibility of parole and dying in prison. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Kempton stared at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. I just wanted to talk to her, he finally whispered so quietly Marcus had to lean forward to hear. That's all it was supposed to be. And there it was. The beginning of the confession Marcus had waited 35 years to hear. Tell me what happened, Walter, he encouraged. his voice gentle now, coaxing. "Start from the beginning." Kempton took a shuddering breath. "I was going through a rough time. Deborah had left me. I was drinking too much. Claire was. She was kind to me in class, helped me when I struggled." His voice cracked. "I thought she cared about me. Stupid, right? She was just doing her job." Marcus remained silent, letting him continue. "That Friday I saw her leaving the bookstore where she worked, followed her home. I just wanted to talk, to see if..." He trailed off. "I knocked on her door, told her I was having trouble with the coursework, asked if she could help me. She let me in." The pieces were falling into place. The scenario Marcus had imagined for decades finally confirmed in the killer's own words. "She made tea," Kempton continued, lost in the memory now. "I smoked. She asked me not to, but said I could finish the one I had lit. We talked about the class material, but then I told her how I felt, that I thought about her all the time, that I needed her." His face contorted with the memory. "She was nice about it, let me down easy, said it wasn't appropriate, that she was my teacher, suggested I might benefit from counseling to deal with my divorce." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Counseling? Like I was some kind of head case." "What happened next, Walter?" Marcus prompted when Kempton fell silent. "I got angry, started shouting. She asked me to leave." His voice dropped to a whisper. "When she went to open the door, I grabbed her, just to stop her from making me leave. I didn't mean to hurt her, not at first. The familiar lie of abusers everywhere. I didn't mean to." Marcus kept his expression neutral with effort. "But then she fought back, scratched me, started screaming." Kempton's breathing quickened. "I panicked, put my hands around her throat to stop the noise, just to quiet her down. But then she kept fighting and I squeezed harder and then she went still." He looked up at Marcus, his eyes hollow. "I never meant for any of it to happen. It was an accident." "And afterward?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "The sexual assault wasn't an accident, Walter." Shame flickered across Kempton's face. "I don't want to talk about that part. You need to tell me everything," Marcus insisted. "All of it." As Kempton continued his confession, detailing the horrific events of that night in April 1988, Marcus felt a strange mixture of triumph and sorrow. Justice for Claire was finally within reach, but the closure came with the bitter knowledge of her final terrified moments. When it was over, when Kempton had signed his written confession, Marcus stepped outside the interrogation room, emotionally drained but resolute. "We got him," Powell said quietly, waiting in the hallway. "After all these years." "We got him," Marcus echoed. "Now I need to make a phone call." "To whom?" "Claire's parents are gone." "Her brother," Marcus replied. "Thomas Brennan. He was 16 when she died. He deserves to know his sister's killer has finally been caught." As he walked away to make the call, Marcus felt the weight of a 35-year promise finally lifting from his shoulders. Claire Brennan would have justice at last. Thomas Brennan stood in the back of the courtroom, his posture rigid as he watched the proceedings. At 51, his dark hair was threaded with silver, his face bearing the subtle lines of middle age. But Marcus could still see echoes of the 16-year-old boy he'd met in 1988, the devastated teenager whose sister had been taken so violently. The Hamilton County Courthouse buzzed with quiet anticipation. The gallery was packed, the high-profile cold case having drawn significant media attention. Court officers maintained strict order, but the tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited the jury's verdict. Marcus sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, where District Attorney Vanessa Chen organized her notes one final time. Across the aisle, Walter Kempton sat beside his public defender, his shoulders hunched, his expression vacant. 6 weeks of trial had aged him visibly, the strain of facing his past evident in the deeper lines around his eyes, the sallowness of his complexion. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Catherine Morales entered the courtroom. Marcus stood with the rest of the assembly, his knees protesting slightly. The weeks of testimony had taken their toll on him as well. He'd relived the investigation countless times, on the witness stand, in preparation sessions with the DA, in his own restless thoughts each night. At times it felt as though he'd never escaped April 1988, as if the past 35 years had been merely an intermission in his pursuit of Claire's killer. "Be seated," Judge Morales instructed, adjusting her glasses as she settled behind the bench. "Bailiff, please bring in the jury." The side door opened, and 12 people filed in solemnly, avoiding eye contact with both the defendant and the spectators. Marcus studied their faces, searching for hints of their decision, but their expressions remained carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Judge Morales addressed them once they were seated, "have you reached a verdict?" The jury forewoman, a retired school teacher in her 60s, stood. "We have, Your Honor. Please hand your verdict form to the bailiff." The bailiff collected the document, delivering it to the judge. Judge Morales reviewed it impassively before returning it to the bailiff, who then passed it back to the forewoman. "Will the defendant please rise?" the judge instructed. Kempton stood shakily, supported by his attorney's hand under his elbow. "In the matter of the state of Ohio versus Walter Kempton, on the count of murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The forewoman's voice rang clear in the hushed courtroom. "We find the defendant guilty." A collective exhale seemed to sweep through the gallery. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, 3.5 decades of determination culminating in this moment of validation. "On the count of rape, how do you find?" "We find the defendant guilty." Thomas Brennan's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a slight relaxation of shoulders that had carried the weight of his sister's unsolved murder for too long. Marcus had seen that subtle change in countless family members over the years. The physical manifestation of justice finally served. Judge Morales thanked the jury for their service and scheduled Kempton's sentencing for the following month. As the court officers moved to take Kempton into custody, the man's vacant expression cracked. For the first time since his confession, genuine emotion flickered across his face. Not remorse for his actions, but fear of the consequences that had finally caught up to him. As the courtroom began to empty, Marcus made his way to Thomas Brennan, who hadn't moved from his position against the back wall. "It's really over," Thomas said quietly as Marcus approached. The two men had developed a tentative rapport during the investigation and trial, not quite friendship, but a connection forged in the crucible of shared purpose. "It's over," Marcus confirmed. "He'll never walk free again." Thomas nodded, absorbing this reality. 35 years. My parents died still wondering who killed their daughter. "I know, I'm sorry it took so long. You never gave up, though." Thomas finally turned to look at Marcus directly. "When you called me last year to tell me you'd found him, I'd almost forgotten what hope felt like." Marcus thought of the photos he'd kept of Claire's parents, Edward and Margaret Brennan, their faces lined with grief as they attended their daughter's funeral, their annual calls on the anniversary of her death, their gradual acceptance that they might never know who had stolen their daughter's future. Margaret had passed in 2010, Edward following less than a year later. "I made a promise," Marcus said simply, "to my parents, and to Claire," Marcus added, "and to myself." They stood in silence for a moment, the bustle of the emptying courtroom flowing around them. "Detective Sullivan?" District Attorney Chen approached, extending her hand. "Excellent work. Your testimony was crucial." "Ms. Chen," Marcus acknowledged with a nod. "This is Thomas Brennan, Claire's brother." "Mr. Brennan," Chen shook his hand as well. "I hope today's verdict brings you some measure of peace." "It brings accountability," Thomas replied carefully. "Peace is more complicated." Chen nodded in understanding. "The sentencing hearing is scheduled for July 15th. You'll have an opportunity to make a victim impact statement if you wish." "I'll be there," Thomas confirmed. As Chen departed to speak with her team, Thomas turned back to Marcus. "I've been thinking about what I'll say at the sentencing. How do you distill 35 years of grief into a statement?" "You don't," Marcus replied honestly. "You just speak your truth as it stands today. The court doesn't expect you to summarize a lifetime of loss in a few minutes." Thomas considered this. "Will you be there?" "Wouldn't miss it," Marcus promised. "But right now I could use a drink. Care to join me?" Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The bar they chose was quiet for a Friday afternoon, tucked away on a side street far enough from the courthouse to avoid the press and court employees. They claimed a corner booth, ordered beers, and sat in companionable silence for several minutes. "I've been going through Claire's things," Thomas finally said, rotating his beer glass slowly between his palms. "My parents kept everything. After Dad died, I packed it all away in my attic. Couldn't bear to look at it, couldn't bear to part with it. But after your call last year, I started sorting through it all." Marcus listened, giving Thomas space to continue at his own pace. "I found her journals. Did you know she kept journals?" Marcus shook his head. "We found a planner in her apartment, but no journals. She left them at our parents' house when she moved into her apartment. Said she needed a fresh start, new journals for her new life." Thomas took a sip of his beer. "I've been reading them, getting to know my sister as an adult, in a way I never could when she was alive. I was just a kid when she died, 16. She was this cool older sister who bought me records and taught me how to drive, but I didn't really know her. What was she like? Marcus asked softly. In her journals? Thomas smiled faintly. Ambitious, funny, insecure sometimes, but determined. She wanted to design medical equipment eventually, technology that could help people. She wrote about her students, her frustrations when they didn't try hard enough, her pride when they succeeded. He paused, his expression darkening. She mentioned Kempton once, just in passing, noted that he seemed to be struggling both with the material and personally. She was concerned about him. A bitter laugh escaped him. Always the compassionate one, Claire. Marcus nodded, thinking of the bright-eyed woman in the photographs, the promising life extinguished. She sounds like an extraordinary person. She was. Thomas straightened. Decision made. I want to establish a scholarship in her name at Columbus Technical for students going into medical technology. I think she would have liked that. That's a fine tribute, Marcus agreed. A way to continue the work she never got to finish. They lapsed into silence again, each lost in thought until Thomas spoke again. What about you? What happens now that the case is closed? It was a question Marcus had been asking himself repeatedly over the past weeks. I've been consulting on cold cases since I retired. There are always more cases, more families waiting for answers. But this one was special to you, Thomas observed. Marcus couldn't deny it. It was my first homicide as lead detective. Her parents' grief. It stayed with me. When cases go cold, most detectives eventually have to move on, focus on cases where there's momentum. But this one, he shook his head. I never could let it go. Well, I'm grateful for your obsession, Thomas said, raising his glass slightly. To Claire, Marcus echoed, touching his glass to Thomas's. As they finished their beers, Marcus felt a peculiar mixture of closure and emptiness. For so long, finding Claire's killer had been his driving purpose. Now that justice had been served, what would fill that space? 2 months later, Marcus stared at the small cardboard box on his kitchen table, its contents spread before him. The personal items he'd accumulated during his decades with Columbus PD. Photos of colleagues, commendations, a few mementos from significant cases, and a single photograph of Claire Brennan, the one her parents had given him during the investigation, which had occupied a corner of his desk until his retirement. His phone rang, interrupting his nostalgic inventory. The caller ID showed Eliza Chen's name. Sullivan, he answered out of habit. Marcus, it's Eliza. Are you sitting down? Something in her tone immediately put him on alert. What's happened? We got a hit in CODIS on that partial DNA profile from the cigarette butt. Marcus frowned in confusion. Kempton already confessed. He's serving his sentence. What hit? Not Kempton's DNA, Eliza clarified. Another case. A 1986 homicide in Dayton, Melissa Carpenter, 22, found strangled in her apartment. The DNA from Claire's case matches evidence from Carpenter's murder. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying Kempton killed before? That's what the DNA suggests, Eliza confirmed. Dayton PD is pulling the case files now. Detective Rivera is heading over there tomorrow to review the evidence. She asked if you'd be willing to consult, given your familiarity with Kempton and Claire's case. Marcus glanced at the memorabilia spread across his table, the physical artifacts of a career spent pursuing justice. Tell her I'll meet her there at 9 a.m. After hanging up, he carefully returned Claire's photo to its place in the box. The case he'd thought concluded was expanding, revealing darker depths. Walter Kempton, it seemed, had more to answer for than they'd realized. The Dayton Police Department's evidence storage facility smelled of dust and old paper, not unlike Columbus's. Detective Sophia Rivera, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, greeted Marcus at the entrance. Detective Sullivan? She extended her hand. Thanks for coming. Your insights will be invaluable. Just Marcus now, he corrected, shaking her hand. I'm retired, remember? Once a detective, always a detective, she replied with a knowing smile. Especially when it comes to cases like these. She led him through the facility to a small conference room, where cardboard boxes labeled Carpenter M. 1986 were stacked on a table. We've pulled everything, Rivera explained, gesturing to the boxes. Original case files, evidence logs, interview transcripts, crime scene photos. Dr. Chen sent over the DNA comparison results this morning. It's a solid match to the cigarette from your Brennan case. Marcus nodded, already slipping back into investigative mode. Tell me about Melissa Carpenter. Rivera opened a file, revealing a photograph of a young woman with blonde hair and a bright smile. 22-year-old kindergarten teacher, found in her apartment on July 17, 1986, by her roommate returning from a weekend trip. Cause of death: manual strangulation. Evidence of sexual assault. Scene was remarkably clean. Minimal evidence, no signs of forced entry. The case went cold after about a year of investigation. Any connection to Kempton that was established at the time? Not that we've found yet. We're still digging into Kempton's history, employment records, residences. We know he lived in Dayton from 1984 to early 1987 when he moved to Columbus. Marcus absorbed this information. The parallels to Claire's case evident. Both young women in their 20s, both strangled in their apartments, both sexually assaulted. No forced entry in either case, suggesting they knew or trusted their killer. Or he presented himself as someone trustworthy, Rivera added. The original detectives theorized Carpenter might have been approached by someone posing as maintenance or utility personnel. Any cigarette butts or similar DNA evidence collected at Carpenter's scene? Yes, actually. Rivera pulled out an evidence log. A cigarette butt was found in the bathroom trash can. Marlboro Red, same as in the Brennan case. It was preserved but yielded limited results with 1986 technology. Dr. Chen is retesting it now with modern methods to confirm the match. Marcus felt a cold certainty settling over him. I think we're looking at a serial offender who was never identified as such. The cases were investigated separately in different jurisdictions before DNA databases were established. Rivera nodded grimly. That's our working theory as well, which raises the question, how many more victims are there? Marcus finished her thought. Exactly. If Kempton killed twice that we know of, there could be others. She spread out a timeline she'd constructed. Kempton was 28 when Carpenter was murdered, 30 when he killed Brennan. That's a specific pattern and age range. What was he doing before 1986? Between 1986 and 1988? After 1988? We need to look for similar cases throughout Ohio, Marcus suggested. The investigator in him fully engaged now despite his retirement. Young women strangled, sexually assaulted, minimal evidence, possibly a cigarette butt at the scene. Already on it, Rivera confirmed. I've requested a search of VICAP for matching MOs within a 200-mile radius between 1980 and 1995. Results should be coming in over the next few days. They spent the morning reviewing Melissa Carpenter's case files, Marcus noting the eerie similarities to Claire Brennan's murder. The precision of the crime scenes, the lack of evidence beyond the cigarette butts, the careful selection of victims, all pointed to a calculated predator rather than the impulsive, rejected suitor Kempton had portrayed himself as during his confession. He lied, Marcus realized aloud as they examined crime scene photos. In his confession, he claimed Claire's murder was unplanned, that he just wanted to talk and things escalated, but this, he gestured to the parallel cases. This shows planning, methodology. He was an experienced killer by the time he murdered Claire. We need to interview him again, Rivera stated. Confront him with this new evidence. See if he'll admit to Carpenter and potentially other victims. Marcus nodded, already anticipating Kempton's reaction. He won't be expecting this. He thought he'd close the book by confessing to Claire's murder. Finding out we've connected him to Carpenter will throw him off balance. Awesome. Will you participate in the interview? Rivera asked. You've built rapport with him. He might be more likely to open up if you're there. The request gave Marcus pause. He'd thought his involvement with Kempton had concluded with the trial, that he could finally close that chapter of his life. But the possibility of identifying other victims, bringing closure to more families like the Brennans, pulled at his sense of duty. I'll be there, he agreed. When do we go? Tomorrow morning. I've already arranged clearance with the prison. Lebanon Correctional Institution loomed against the bright September sky, its utilitarian architecture and razor wire a stark reminder of its purpose. Marcus and Rivera were escorted through security checks and along sterile hallways to a small interview room where Walter Kempton waited, shackled to a table. Prison had not been kind to Kempton in the months since his sentencing. His already thin frame had grown gaunt, his complexion ashen. He looked up as they entered, confusion momentarily crossing his features at the sight of Marcus. Detective Sullivan, he acknowledged warily. Didn't expect to see you again. Mr. Kempton, Marcus replied evenly, taking a seat across from him. This is Detective Rivera from Dayton Police Department. We have some questions for you. Kempton's eyes darted to Rivera, then back to Marcus. Dayton? What's this about? I already confessed to everything. Did you, Walter? Marcus kept his tone conversational, non-threatening. We're not so sure about that anymore. Rivera opened a folder, placing a photograph of Melissa Carpenter on the table. Do you recognize this woman? Kempton barely glanced at the photo before shaking his head. No, should I? Her name was Melissa Carpenter, Rivera stated. She was murdered in Dayton in July 1986, strangled in her apartment, sexually assaulted. She let the information hang in the air for a moment before continuing. You lived in Dayton then, didn't you, Walter? A flicker of unease crossed Kempton's face. A lot of people lived in Dayton. We have DNA evidence linking you to Melissa's murder, Marcus said bluntly. The same DNA that connected you to Claire Brennan. Kempton's composure faltered visibly, his breathing quickening. That's impossible. Science doesn't lie, Walter, Marcus interrupted. The cigarette butt you left at Melissa's apartment matches the one from Claire's. It's you. Silence filled the room as Kempton processed this revelation, his eyes darting between the detectives and the photograph on the table. I want a lawyer, he finally said, his voice barely audible. That's your right, Rivera acknowledged. But before we end this conversation, I want you to understand something. We're not just looking at Melissa Carpenter. We're reviewing every unsolved strangulation case in Ohio between 1980 and 1995. If there are more victims, we'll find them, and we'll connect you to each one. I didn't kill anyone but Claire, Kempton insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. That was different, personal. Was it? Marcus challenged softly. Because from where we're sitting, it looks like a pattern, a methodology, the work of a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. Kempton's eyes narrowed. I said I want a lawyer. Marcus nodded, signaling to Rivera that they should respect the request. As they gathered their materials to leave, he looked directly at Kempton one last time. We'll be back, Walter. And next time, we'll have more names, more faces, more evidence. This isn't over. The conference room at Dayton PD had transformed over the following weeks. Its walls now covered with timelines, photographs, and maps. Marcus had become a fixture there, his retirement once again on hold as he immersed himself in the expanding investigation. VICAP results are in, Rivera announced, entering with a stack of printouts. 12 potential matches between 1982 and 1992, all within Ohio and neighboring states. Marcus took the reports, scanning them quickly. Any standouts? 3 in particular. Rivera pointed to specific cases. Janet Weber, 23, Cincinnati, 1983. Strangulation, sexual assault, cigarette evidence. Rebecca Donovan, 25, Columbus, 1985, same MO. And Diane Ferris, 24, Toledo, 1990. 1990? Marcus looked up, surprised. That's 2 years after Claire Brennan. Yes, and here's where it gets interesting. Rivera pulled out a map marked with locations and dates. If we track Kempton's known residences and employment locations against these murders, there's a clear correlation. He lived in Cincinnati from 1982 to 1984, Dayton from 1984 to 1987, Columbus from 1987 to 1989, and Toledo from 1989 to 1992. He was moving between cities, Marcus realized, the pattern suddenly clear, establishing himself in each new location, selecting victims, then relocating after each murder. Exactly, and look at this. Rivera laid out employment records. In each city, he worked maintenance or similar jobs that would give him access to apartment buildings or knowledge of young women living alone. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a calculated mobile predator who had evaded detection by crossing jurisdictional boundaries. What had initially appeared to be isolated incidents were now revealing themselves as a methodical series of crimes. We need DNA from each of these cases, Marcus stated, already thinking ahead. If we can establish a definitive link between Kempton and multiple victims, we might be able to leverage that for a comprehensive confession. I've already requested evidence from each department, Rivera confirmed. It'll take time, but with modern DNA techniques, we should be able to confirm or exclude Kempton for most of these cases. Marcus nodded, studying the faces of the potential victims displayed on the wall. Young women whose lives had been cut short, whose cases had gone cold, whose families had waited decades for answers. The parallels to Claire Brennan were unmistakable, each representing a life full of promise violently ended. We should notify Thomas Brennan, he said after a moment. He deserves to know his sister's case has expanded like this. Are you sure? Rivera asked. It might reopen wounds that have barely begun to heal. Marcus considered this. Perhaps, but in my experience, Families of victims would rather know the full truth, no matter how difficult, than be sheltered from it. Thomas has spent 35 years seeking answers about his sister's death. He's strong enough to handle this development. Rivera nodded her agreement. I'll leave that to you then. You have the relationship with him. As the investigation progressed over subsequent weeks, DNA results began confirming their suspicions. Of the 12 potential cases identified through VICAP, 5 were positively linked to Walter Kempton through DNA evidence. 2 were inconclusive due to degraded samples. The remaining 5 awaited testing. The emerging pattern was chilling in its precision. Between 1982 and 1992, Walter Kempton had moved across Ohio, establishing himself in each new city before selecting and stalking victims who matched his preferred type: young professional women in their 20s, living alone, with regular, predictable schedules. Thomas Brennan had received the news stoically when Marcus called him, his initial shock giving way to a grim determination to support the investigation in any way possible. He had connected with the families of other confirmed victims, forming a loose support network united by their shared tragedy and pursuit of justice. By early November, the investigation had compiled enough evidence to approach Kempton again, this time with an overwhelming case demonstrating his decade-long pattern of predation. The interview room at Lebanon Correctional was the same as before, but the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Kempton entered with his attorney, a court-appointed defender who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation. Across from them sat Marcus, Rivera, and Assistant District Attorney James Morales, who had joined the case as it expanded to include multiple jurisdictions. Mr. Kempton, Morales began formally. You've been advised of your rights and have counsel present. We're here to discuss several homicides to which you've been connected through DNA evidence. Kempton's attorney interjected. My client maintains his innocence in any cases besides the Brennan homicide, to which he has already confessed and been sentenced. That position is becoming increasingly untenable, Morales replied, opening a folder. We have confirmed DNA matches linking your client to 5 additional murders spanning a decade. He laid out photographs of each victim, alongside the corresponding DNA reports. Janet Weber, Melissa Carpenter, Rebecca Donovan, Claire Brennan, Diane Ferris, Amanda Mitchell. Kempton's face remained impassive, but Marcus noted the slight trembling of his hands beneath the table. The state is prepared to pursue charges in each of these cases, Morales continued. Given the evidence, conviction is all but certain. That means 5 additional life sentences, potentially with the death penalty in consideration for several of them. What exactly are you proposing? Kempton's attorney asked cautiously. A comprehensive confession, Morales stated. All victims, including any we haven't yet identified. In exchange, we take the death penalty off the table and consolidate the sentences. Marcus watched Kempton carefully during this exchange. The man's carefully maintained facade was cracking under the weight of the evidence before him. After a whispered consultation with his attorney, Kempton finally spoke. If I were to elaborate on my activities, he said slowly, what guarantees do I have? Written agreement, signed by prosecutors from all relevant jurisdictions, Morales assured him. But it must be complete and truthful. Any victims you omit, any details you falsify, the deal is void. Another whispered conference between Kempton and his attorney followed. Finally, Kempton straightened in his chair, a strange calm settling over him. All right, he said quietly. I'll tell you everything, but not with him here. He gestured toward Marcus. Why not? Rivera asked, surprised. Because he looks at me like he knows me, Kempton replied, his eyes fixed on Marcus. Like he's always known what I really am. I don't like it. Marcus held Kempton's gaze steadily. I've been investigating you for 35 years, Walter. Maybe I do know you better than you know yourself. After a brief discussion, it was decided that Marcus would observe the interview from an adjoining room while Rivera and Morales conducted the questioning. As Marcus stood to leave, Kempton called after him. Detective Sullivan. Marcus paused, looking back. Claire wasn't personal, Kempton said flatly. She wasn't special. She was just available. The casual cruelty of the statement was clearly intended to wound, to undermine the significance of the case that had defined much of Marcus's career. But instead of anger, Marcus felt only a profound sadness for the lives this man had destroyed. I know, Walter, he replied quietly. That's what makes you a monster. From behind the one-way glass, Marcus watched as Walter Kempton methodically detailed his crimes over the next several hours. His confessions were clinical, detached, recounting each murder as if describing a mundane task. 7 victims in total, two beyond those they'd already identified through DNA. The pattern was consistent: selection, surveillance, gaining access to the victim's home through deception, strangulation, sexual assault, and careful evidence removal. The only evidence he consistently overlooked was the cigarette butts, a compulsion he couldn't overcome despite its eventual role in his downfall. As the confession proceeded, Marcus took meticulous notes, ensuring that each victim's story was properly documented. When it was over, when Kempton had signed his statement and been returned to his cell, Marcus remained in the observation room, processing what he'd witnessed. Rivera joined him, equally subdued by the weight of Kempton's revelations. 7 women, she said softly. 7 lives. 7 families who can finally have answers, Marcus added, finding the silver lining in this dark cloud. 7 cold cases closed. Thanks to you, Rivera noted. If you hadn't kept Claire Brennan's case alive all these years, none of this would have come to light. Marcus shook his head. Thanks to modern DNA technology and good police work, I was just one part of that. As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Marcus found himself thinking of Claire Brennan, not as Kempton's victim, but as the bright, ambitious young woman Thomas had described from her journals. In solving her murder, they had uncovered a pattern of predation that had claimed multiple victims. Claire's case had been the key that unlocked justice not just for her, but for 6 other women whose families had waited decades for answers. It wasn't the resolution Marcus had envisioned when he first stood in Claire's apartment in 1988, but perhaps it was the one that honored her memory most fittingly, bringing light to darkness, answers to questions, and closure to grief that had persisted for far too long. 1 year later, November 2025, the small conference room at Columbus Police Department was crowded with people connected by a single, terrible thread. Family members of Walter Kempton's victims had gathered from across Ohio, brought together by Detective Sophia Rivera and Marcus Sullivan for what they hoped would provide a measure of closure. Marcus stood near the front of the room, watching as the last few attendees found seats. Thomas Brennan sat in the front row, now a familiar face after a year of collaboration. Beside him were Janet Weber's parents, now in their 70s, Rebecca Donovan's sister, Diane Ferris's husband, Amanda Mitchell's brother, and representatives from Melissa Carpenter's extended family. The 7th victim, Patricia Ellison, was represented by a cousin, the only family member they'd been able to locate. Thank you all for coming, Marcus began once everyone was settled. As you know, Walter Kempton's comprehensive confession last year allowed prosecutors to close 7 homicide cases spanning from 1982 to 1992. His plea agreement has been finalized, resulting in 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He paused, allowing this information to sink in. The faces before him showed varying emotions: relief, lingering grief, subdued satisfaction at justice finally served. Today isn't about Kempton, Marcus continued. Today is about honoring the women whose lives he took and acknowledging the impact their loss had on all of you. Detective Rivera and I wanted to bring you together, not only to share final case updates, but to give you the opportunity to connect with others who truly understand your experience. Rivera stepped forward, adding, "We've also invited Dr. Eliza Chen, the forensic genealogist whose work was instrumental in linking these cases. She'll explain how advances in DNA technology finally brought this predator to justice after decades." For the next 2 hours, the group shared stories, not of the investigations or the crimes, but of the women themselves. Janet's love of classical music, Melissa's dedication to her kindergarten students, Rebecca's ambitions to open her own accounting firm, Claire's brilliance with electronics, Diane's passion for environmental causes, Amanda's talent for photography, Patricia's devotion to her community. As the formal portion of the meeting concluded, the families broke into smaller groups, exchanging contact information and forming connections that only those with shared trauma could truly understand. Marcus observed from a distance, giving them space while remaining available if needed. "You've done good work here," Thomas Brennan said, approaching Marcus with coffee in hand. "Bringing everyone together like this. It was Rivera's idea," Marcus admitted, "a support network for the families. Still, I wanted to thank you," Thomas extended his hand, "for everything, for never giving up on Claire's case, for making sure Kempton faced justice for all his victims." As they shook hands, Marcus noticed a small pin on Thomas's lapel, a stylized electronic circuit in the shape of a heart. Thomas followed his gaze. The logo for the Claire Brennan Memorial Scholarship, he explained. We awarded the first one last month to a young woman studying biomedical engineering at Columbus Technical. Thought Claire would approve. She would, Marcus agreed, a sense of satisfaction warming him despite the somber occasion. After the gathering dispersed, Marcus remained behind, helping Rivera organize the case materials that would be archived, now that all 7 investigations were officially closed. The conference room walls had been cleared of the timeline and victim photographs, returning to anonymous beige. What will you do now? Rivera asked as they worked. Return to retirement for real this time? Marcus admits that retirement doesn't suit him. The Kempton case has reignited his purpose. Rivera encourages him to keep consulting on cold cases, and as Marcus leaves the department, he realizes he's not ending a career. He's beginning a new chapter dedicated to long-forgotten victims. By March 2026, 4 months into his official consulting role, Marcus reopens the 1991 murder of Elizabeth Thornton. The cold case resembles Kempton's work, but includes key inconsistencies, signs of struggle, defensive wounds, and irregular timing compared to Kempton's pattern. A cigarette butt found at the scene mirrors Kempton's crime scenes, so Marcus and Mercer request modern DNA testing and check whether it matches his known profile. The DNA results arrive. It is not Kempton, and there are no CODIS matches. The cigarette brand is different, Camel, not Marlboro, and the ligature marks suggest a cord rather than manual strangulation. The killer mimicked Kempton, but with crucial differences. This raises a disturbing possibility. Someone in law enforcement may have recognized Kempton's pattern decades before it became public and used that knowledge to hide their own crime. Marcus asks Dr. Chen to run genealogical DNA and compare it against officers who worked multiple Kempton scenes. As the investigation deepens, Marcus and Mercer compile names of law enforcement personnel who had access across jurisdictions. The list narrows to 3: Officer Harding, Detective Sloan, and forensic technician Paul Whitaker, who processed evidence in Columbus, Toledo, and Cincinnati. With genealogical DNA already suggesting a Northern European male, the Thornton case now appears tied to someone inside the system. Marcus realizes they may be facing a killer who hid in plain sight, someone who leveraged Kempton's unknown spree for cover, forcing them into a darker, more complex chapter of the investigation. Marcus and Mercer review files on 3 retired technicians, Whitaker, Sloan, and Harding, any of whom could have noticed similarities between the old strangulation cases. But when genealogical DNA from Elizabeth Thornton's cigarette connects directly to the Whitaker family line, suspicion shifts sharply toward Paul Whitaker. They visit Whitaker at his Florida retirement community. The charming former tech seems composed at first, but when Marcus reveals the DNA link and his access to multiple Kempton crime scenes, Whitaker's demeanor changes. Asked to give a DNA sample, he refuses and abruptly ends the interview. As they leave, both detectives agree his reaction was telling, possibly personal. A judge quickly approves a warrant for Whitaker's DNA, but when police arrive at his condo the next morning, he is gone. Neighbors saw him packing suitcases the night before. Whitaker has fled. Marcus notes that running is nearly an admission of guilt. He knows the system too well, how evidence works, how to avoid detection, and may have anticipated this moment for decades. Although a nationwide BOLO is issued and his accounts flagged, Marcus doubts the search will be easy. Back in Columbus, he digs deeper into Whitaker's past. The disturbing possibility emerges that Whitaker may have used his position as a forensic technician, not only to commit the Thornton murder, but perhaps others, exploiting privileged access to crime scenes and evidence while hiding behind Kempton's pattern. As weeks pass with no sign of him, the investigation expands. What began as a cold case has turned into the hunt for a predator who may have spent years hiding in plain sight inside law enforcement, and whose full list of victims remains unknown.